and welcome to another amazing episode of Logistics with Purpose. I am your host today, Kristi Porter, Chief Marketing Officer at Vector Global Logistics, and I proudly get to co-host this podcast. Today, we are excited to have Johan Karlsson, the Managing Director at Better Shelter, ranked as one of the top 5 sustainability entrepreneurs in Sweden. So it's pretty exciting. I've been waiting and waiting to get him onto the show after I read about them. So Johan, welcome. So glad you're here.
Thank you very much. And, equally very good to be here on the show with you.
Yes, I am really thrilled to introduce you to our American audience and our global audience. For those of you who are not aware, and we'll get to Better Shelter in just a minute, but let's try something different. Let's start off with just some short questions to get our brains up and rolling. You're at the end of the day. I'm at the beginning of the day, so we probably both need a little bit of a boost. So you're just going to answer with the first thing that comes to your mind, okay?
Absolutely. Let's go.
All right. I am really interested in these questions, so I'm excited what you have to say. So if you could learn a new skill instantly, what would it be?
That would be to sing. Absolutely.
Oh.
That would be the skill I would love to pick up. Something I haven't dared to do since I was kicked out of the choir in my middle school. Yeah.
And what is your go-to morning routine for productivity?
For productivity, it's usually to do something which is not immediately productive, like going for a run or for physical exercise. That's what I would prefer.
That is great. And what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the word purpose?
It's complicated, I would say, because it's something, I think on one hand, I would argue that it could be a lofty promise and that the actions would be more important than the purpose, like how we do things are more important than the why. But then, of course, we are in a purpose-driven organization, really working hard to improve the everyday lives of people displaced. So it's also important, but it's complicated.
It is. Complicated is a great word to describe it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What does success look like to you?
I think that when we make impact through our actions, and they can be large and small. It's everything from being impacted by a coworker in the morning to achieving a great project that really helps many people. But I think it's really about when actions get the way we intended them to.
Yes.
To happen. Yeah.
And what is the last book you read that you couldn't put down?
I would love to give you a very credible book here. I was almost lying, Googling, what should I say, but it's, I could not find it. It's, to be very honest, I'm not a very great book reader. And when I do it, I pick it up. It's typical, the sort of self-help literature stuff that I will go, that you don't really should tell people that you're reading, because it's not considered nice literature, in a sense. But for me, that has been important. So I think I would probably say it would be, The School of Life with Alain de Botton, for example. That's something like a very practical, sort of emotional, practical, philosophical guide has helped me a lot. And I think that would be my honest answer for you. And then I would have some credible novel or something like that, but I would not. Then I would be lying.
I'm with you. I'm on board for those kinds of books. So thank you. Yeah. Thanks for getting us rolling with these. Now we want to dig into a little bit more about your background and hear more about you. So tell us a little about where you grew up and your childhood. You said when we were talking before, you're currently outside of Stockholm. So is that where you grew up? Did you grow up nearby? Tell us a little bit about those early years.
Absolutely. No, I grew up in a very, I would say, safe, middle-class suburb of Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. I grew up with my family, my 2 parents. They were working a lot. So actually, I was also growing up with my grandmother who was taking care of me. So I had a very, very close relationship with my grandmother, until I left home when I was 18. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's where I went to school, and I think it was a very good and safe environment. When I was 18, I really longed to get out of there. I moved to New York, there to do something different, but that's where I grew up, and I'm not living too far away from there now. As life happens, I'm living some 20 kilometers away from where I grew up.
Fantastic. Well, what's a story from your early years that now that you can look back shaped who you are and what you do may have had to do with your grandmother, may have not?
Yeah, I think that it's difficult to like put the finger on one story that helped me, but I think one thing is that I had a very, what to say, I grew up, I think, in a very safe environment, and it's still, which really helped me because then I dared to take risks. I there was a safety net, there was someone to protect me, when I've fallen. So, and my parents have always encouraged me to sort of do what I want to do. And also, growing up in, I'm born in 81. So growing up in the 80s, 90s, the world was very different from where it is today. It was this sense of optimism, in the world that the Berlin Wall had fallen. It was like we can do anything we want to. So, after, high school, it was about traveling and exploring, real life. So I think that it has changed a lot, but I think really to have this safe, environment where I was, it really helped me a lot to take risks in life and to pursue, my working life, working in the space where I'm now in humanitarian innovation, in humanitarian work. I don't think I would have dared to take these steps. Maybe not if I would have grown up today or in a less safe environment. It sounds a very boring answer, but it really is true. I think that has really helped and shaped me more than I would say, because it's not that I was not exposed to humanitarian work or to development work. I had an uncle who were running, development projects in Eastern Africa, and I was in Kenya and Tanzania when I was young. I could see these firsthand. But back then, this was nothing that I wanted to do. It was like I wanted to go to the US. I wanted to do other stuff. It was not at that point in time. It was not that came later in life, the direction I've taken right now. So I would say that this, you know, a
Yeah.
safe environment and a very, good relationship with my grandmother. I think that, have helped me a lot.
Yeah, well, sometimes perhaps even by experiencing and knowing very well what is safe, you had more empathy for those who, as we'll discover, do not have a safe environment to be in. So you have to know what it is to know what it isn't as well. And so maybe that had something to do with it too. Thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit about your education. You have a very impressive stack of resumes behind you. You have a degree in multimedia programming at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, so you did make it to New York. A diploma in drawing, painting, and sculpture at Kokstad in Stockholm. A BFA in design products at University of Gothenburg, and an executive MBA from the Stockholm School of Economics, and an MFA in industrial design from Comstock, University of College Arts and Crafts and Design. That is a wide range and a lot of degrees. Well, first of all, I want to tell you, or I want to ask you, why all the education? Why was education so important to you?
I mean, that has obviously it has taught me everything, but it's of course it's about what we are taught in school, like the subject matters as such. They are very, very important, but I would say it's more, particularly I would say in art school that I've done, it's more like you're taught an attitude to life, a way of looking at life, which is very, a practical life, an experimental life that I think I really picked up in art school, which is, I mean, I don't work today with sort of, hands-on fine arts, sculpture or paintings. I've done that a lot during my studies, but I think there's something explorative in these practices that really has helped me and that I still utilize in like how, I run our nonprofit organization today, and we're dealing with totally different things. So I think education has been very, very important. And then obviously, of course, I see new people, you know, and then yes, I think there's a fact thing. I never got my degree from Borough of Manhattan Community College when I was in New York, because actually I did discover when I was in the US, we had to take some fine art classes even when we did programming. And that was what really changed my mind. And like, I don't want to do programming as I thought I would do. I want to pursue a career in fine art. I didn't know that existed until I was exposed to it. I think, which was something very good with the American education system, that you really have, in Sweden, you have to choose, do you do economics or do you do engineering? Whatever you do, you pick a subject and you go with that. In the
Okay.
US, for the undergrad, it was much more, yes, you have your programming classes and all that, but you have to do your fine art classes. And for me, that fine art class I had at the Borough Manhattan Community College, it really got me to do more and more art classes, without my parents knowing, I changed most of my majors to do fine arts whenever I could, and then I went back to Sweden and pursued a bachelor in design, and then later on a master. So it's been very important for me with education, and but I think that New York is to blame for a lot of these things, or for at least for exposing me to the art world. Yeah.
And so what is it you originally were going to pursue?
No, it was to be honest, it was more I wanted to go to New York to go to New York, and I wanted the reason. And I was like, okay, I guess I did programming. It's like in my background, my parents has been like, do you want to do, engineering or economics? That has sort of been the two things you choose in life. I didn't really know that you could do design or industrial design, that was a major. I didn't know it actually existed when I got to the US. And then I was living in this dormitory in Brooklyn, and all of my friends were studying art and design, and they were doing stuff that I only dreamt about. I was like, you can actually is this a job? You can live from this, So that was really good discovery. And as I said, then I changed all my programming classes and my math classes, to fine arts, not telling my parents at the time. And then I came back and I told them, and then I was accepted to the, engineering college, the Royal Institute of Engineering in Stockholm. When I got back from the US, and then I told my parents, I don't want to start this career. I'm actually going to do fine art instead. And that was a surprise to them. But I think that's, to answer the question there, I think these are one of the beautiful things with education. It can take you places you would not do. And it's like, you don't know until you're exposed to it, what it does to you. And for me, that had a very fundamental change in my life, that 1 year I had in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, sounds like that was one impactful year. So you have everything from the industrial design to economics to the fine arts. How have those kind of played into each other throughout your career? How have those mixed and merged? And have you thought, oh, I never thought I'd actually be able to put these things together, but actually they do go together?
No, I think that what we get from the art world was really like this attitude to go on and try things, to explore things, and doing something without knowing why you did it, because there was this gut feel to it that was very important in fine art. And I think there's this quote by Picasso where he said, if you know what to do, what's the point of doing it? And I think that was really something I took to heart. It was, yes, this exploration. Then of course later in life, when I had done my education and the design, and I started to do projects, we came to a lot of hurdles, and basically we were entrepreneurs, driving organizations and businesses, doing design, etc., and events. But we met all the challenges, of real business life, and then I lacked tools to frame our problems, to help us break them down, to articulate solutions, because it was a lot of trying and exploration. I think that's really, and when we grew, Better Shelter, our our NGO today, it really started as a small social enterprise, with a few people, but it grew. It exposed us to a lot of new things, like how do we do purchasing, how do we do tendering, how do we do sales, how do we manage our operations in a good way. And here it was very painful to do everything like, on a, what you say, trial basis. So then, of course, I came to the conclusion, that it would probably be a good thing to do some, to study some finance and operations. And that's hence I get my MBA, in that. And I think that together, these, I would say, the sort of the art perspective on life, on exploring things, sort of a bit trusting your feeling, having that mindset of exploration, together with the analytical tool palette that you actually get from business school, how to break down problem, how to analyze them, how to communicate them effectively. I think that's a very powerful combination, to use together. These tools complement each other very well. I think it would be very difficult for me to do what I'm doing today if I would not have either of them. I'm like using both in our daily activities.
I love that. That's fantastic. And good for you for recognizing both where your strength and weaknesses lie and
Yeah,
figuring out how
yeah.
to establish all of those. Well, let's talk about, before we get back to Better Shelter, which is an incredible organization. Early in your career, you were kind of more in that design space. You established Johan Karlsson, which was a local design firm, but you had a global presence. You were creating innovative designs and offering distinct avant-garde design pieces. So I'm curious, so you were including in retail spaces. So this is early in your career, and you're in large retail spaces such as Drug Design, Manufacturum, and Ilums Bogalas. I apologize to the entire Sweden audience listening for my pronunciation on those, but what established or what inspired you to design it and then drove your passion initially for creating designs like this?
I think it was at the time what it was with Johan Karlsson was that I was very good friends, me and my ex-wife, we were together back then. We had a good collaboration with a couple from Taiwan, and we had this passion for Taiwanese and traditional Chinese culture and design and expression, so we want to learn more of it. And they, on the other hand, they had moved to Sweden because they really loved our Scandinavian minimalism. So it was quite interesting, like, so this was of an interest of each other's culture, that really drove this, that they would say, okay, but when you live, how are you using these furniture and how do you shape the objects in your everyday life? And, what's the reason for the things you're doing like this, or how you are decorating? What's the meaning? I mean, we were very interested, as Swedes, in Chinese ornaments. What do they mean? So that was really it. So I think that was one component of it, understanding of different culture, like not an understanding, but like we wanted to explore different cultures and what it mean, learn from each other. And then it was also that we thought that we have something to tell here. If we do a fusion here of our two backgrounds, we can create something which is quite unique. And then we just did it because it was what felt right, and we did some licensing design that other produced for us, but we were very fearless in that we wanted to start our own production. And we set up some production in Taiwan, and we imported it up to Europe, and we distributed it from here. We did a tons of mistakes that were very, very costly, but I think we just had this, sort of, how hard can it be attitude, and we wanted to, and that was, I think, rewarded in sort of media recognitions, etc. Because we got the right venues to be, but financially, from a business perspective, and being young families as we were back then, it was like super challenging. But I think it was this interest for culture, and then also this sort of a bit of lack of respect of, how difficult it can be to build an organization or to build a company within our space.
Okay, well then I have to ask, what was one of those? I love that you said fearless attitude, because I feel like that's what it takes for sure. So what was one of those big learnings for you?
I mean, well, I mean, now I can laugh at it when I studied finance, but things like working capital, like how much money we need to actually have, even though we were profitable on our profit and loss statements, we didn't have enough capital to run the organization, because the more we sold, the more we had to produce, the bigger warehouses we had to have, and we did have different warehouses across the world. It just consumed everything, and we didn't know that there were like tons of people out there who could have helped us out with these things. We didn't know back then that there is, that there is investors and finance opportunities that also could have helped us to bridge this. So we were trying our own, really cutting down on everything we took out from the company in terms of salaries and or profits or anything. And we tried to do everything ourselves. And that in the long run was exhaustive. It was too exhaustive. And then, of course, to that add, things like international shipping, different Incoterms, different cultures, different attitudes in when you pay your bills. It's very different from when bills are paid in Sweden to when they're paid in Southern Europe, to make one reference. So we learned a lot of these things, but even though we loved the idea, I think it was of what we were doing. We had a passion for that. It was also very tough, and since we were a family company, I think that is also a tough thing to start a company with like two families, because I think we'd probably not have done that the same way again, because when it gets heavy, it's a packed, work life and family life is then really together in tandem. It's great when it works, but when it doesn't, it's tough. So yeah, so I think that was it. So that took out its toll, and I think we were, after 2 incredible years, we had been to a lot of places in Paris and Milan and in Taiwan, and showcasing our work. We were exhausted. It was like it's too much of a heavy lift, I think, from us. So
Sounds like it, and I'm
yeah.
sure those will certainly be lessons that sound like they probably carried through your career as well. Because in 2008, you took a different turn completely, and you started working in humanitarian shelter, energy, water purification projects, such as the emergency housing project, the refugee housing unit, and now better shelter. So that is a very different turn from fashion, home goods, yeah, completely different turn in your life. So what inspired that change? What was it about that sector that interested you?
I think it was that I learned it was serendipity how I got into the sector, because it was actually my old professor at my university called me and said, "You, we have this organization in Sweden that are looking into sustainable humanitarian shelter designs, and they need someone who knows textile and industrial design, and these were my majors. Do you think you can help them out?" And then I came there, and I was like, "Yeah, I would be happy to look at this on on a commission basis." But then I get to meet with the different humanitarian agencies that worked in these fields, and then I was like seeing that what they were using was tents like we had seen on TVs, and they were very much like not tents that I went camping with, more like the tents that my grandmother had when she was a kid. And I learned these facts by then. By then, it was like 42 million people displaced. This was around 2008. Today, that figure is more than 100 million. So the development has been tough since, but at that it was significant number of people displaced. I learned that the average duration, for displacement at that time were more than 17 years. So it's not like, it wasn't like going to a festival or anything like that. It wasn't like only emergency. It was people say for years. And then I was, without knowing the humanitarian world, it was, why are we providing tents that don't last longer than 6 months, maximum a year, to people who we know are likely to be in these situations for years and decades? And why is it that I knew what we were doing with our, with Johan Karlsson and other assignments we had, we were doing sort of more avant-garde stuff, and I could not see that in the humanitarian world. So it was like, why is this the way? And we should be able to do something better. And I think we were very blessed at the time with our naivety, that was like, again, it was a bit, how hard can it be to make something better than a tent, for these people, so that's why I have an interest. And I think the more I've worked in this, we met so many people who have been genuinely passionate about what they're doing. They have been traveling a lot. We did focus interviews with people in Sweden who had, been refugees. They have lived in these camps for long, and then they come, find asylum in Sweden, and then, Swedes, but they have this experience that they share these stories with us. And then we thought, okay, but then we can use our tools as designers, to shape everyday objects, to the better. What if we can apply them to a humanitarian setting and actually try to make families and people a bit more safe, getting some more dignity, some more sense of home than the only like the shelter component, like to bring some basic safety and dignity, to at least to increase those components in emergency relief. So that's how we started, like a small project. And the more we worked, or the more I worked with it, the more interested I got, and then that's it. And I think, I remember one conversation I had with IKEA, the design manager at IKEA at the time. I thought that this is actually something that IKEA should do. This is like IKEA, it's like flat pack design, you put it in boxes, you assemble it yourself. This is like IKEA mission, you should do it. So I actually pitched this idea with the help of the design manager at IKEA to the CEO of IKEA at the time in Sweden. And he actually said, this is a very good idea. It resonates a lot, but it's not our core business. We're going to do what's inside the four walls. We're not going to do the four walls themselves. But do have a talk to our foundation, the IKEA Foundation, a philanthropic entity, within IKEA. And that we had it. I think one thing led to another, and that's how we got our partnership up together with IKEA Foundation. And then later on, we got the UN Refugee Agency on board as well.
That's fantastic. So, whenever you were first starting having these conversations with people, so you stated like, and I had no idea 70 years was a average lifespan of how long people are
Yeah.
living. What were those conversations like? What were their experiences? I understand approaching it from the design perspective for sure, but I'm sure it also got very personal and in talking to people, especially if they're refugees coming from another place. What were those conversations like? How did it affect you?
Yeah, I think they were very direct and they affected me like the game motivation. We heard these, you know, stories that at the time they didn't make any sense to me on why we had the system set up as we were. For example, my focus, we have a big Somali community here in Stockholm. So then, of course, my sample group was, Somali people who had then been living in the refugee camps in Kenya, in northern Kenya on the borders there. And they told us stories, like the tents we have, they are, designed for 5 people, but our, family sizes are much, much larger than that. So what do I do? Refugee camps are not safe places. There's a lot of, violence, sexual violence, etc. in these places. And there was one father I talked to, and it was like, what should I do? Should I have my wife and kids living in one tent and me and some kids in another, having them at risk, or should we squeeze together? There were stories on the tents when they broke down, but due to the UV degradation, how they actually put diesel onto the fabric because then it got sticky, and that really tied together the dust you had in the air and the sand to make it waterproof. And this is like, this is so unsafe to live in a fabric tent that has that and add to that covered in diesel. So it didn't make sense, and it was like all these questions, like how can we make something better? Now I have, of course, have a better understanding for the limitations of sort of the humanitarian system and what they can do. But I think that was really, can we make something that is a bit more tailored to the end user needs, something that can be a bit more adapted locally to meet different cultural requirements, etc. So I think it was very it was emotional, but I think in a good way, because it sparked our enthusiasm. And they were glad that we were asking these questions, that we had this interview. And also, I think it's good to say that these user research we had was, they were now in Sweden living their lives here as Swedish citizens. So this was in the past. I think it would have been a very difficult thing to do this user studies interview for people who are in that situation at the current, because of a lot of ethical dilemmas, and I think it would be very difficult to assume an open response to that, because there is all this dependency issue that you have if you're receiving humanitarian aid, etc. So I think that would have been, I think that this actually helped us have very open and very frank discussions, and so I think it really motivated us to get us started.
Well, we've kind of given a preview to the audience of what Better Shelter is, but you've provided 90,000 shelters in 80 different countries, which is phenomenal work. So congratulations on that. But I want to be really, I want you to really explain to our audience, what is Better Shelter? What is the mission? How did it start? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Now, our mission is to provide, safe and dignified shelters to people who have been forced to flee their homes, and that is, in regardless of they flee due to conflict or natural disasters. It's people have been forcibly displaced. We want to ensure that they get a safe and dignified home, something that we say can be used as a stepping stone or something to build onto to a future where they can receive a durable solution. So we are not providing like durable shelters, like permanent houses. We are actually really targeting to provide safe and dignified temporary shelters for people who have been forced to leave their home until they have somewhere safe place to go. And we can think that is not too many people, but actually we are today more than 100 million people that are forcibly displaced. So it's the numbers are huge, and they are growing. We are addressing the people, the very few percentage here, I think, who are in the most difficult situations, who are in situations where you have very little locals, like supply chains, local networks to deliver shelter materials locally, where you don't have any political allowance or political will to make any durable solutions. So people are going to stay there, but for political reasons, they may not be able to build anything durable because there's a land dispute. They may not own the land; it's owned by someone else. So I would say that we are from out of these more than 100 million people displaced, we are really targeting what I would say to families and the people that are really taking the toughest hits and that are in these very tough situations. Sometimes protracted crisis, like Syria, Northwest Syria right now, which has been ongoing for more than a decade, to large natural disasters like the earthquake we had in Turkey last year. Where we had millions of people displaced overnight. So it ranges, but I think that's the core component of what we do. And what we want to do with them is to provide them a shelter. And the shelter we are providing, it is like an IKEA flat pack furniture. It comes flat packed in two small boxes. You sort of assemble it yourself. It's just like any IKEA furniture that you may have. There may be a few curse words here and there when you assemble it, but you can do it yourself without some technical training. It's a straightforward process. Everything you need is in the box. And this is, to enable us to distribute this really anywhere in the world and to work really independently from any other like external resources. So what we want to do is by this to amplify the local communities that need some solutions, in the duration of emergency. So that's what we're doing. And I think when you look at our shelters, what do they look like? I think they look like they're like a child book's drawing of a house. It's they have a roof, 4 windows and a door. Unlike a tent, you can stand upright into them. They have a lamp, so you can study and you read it. Have activities after the sun has set. So that's how it is. So I would say it's our product is easy as a flat packed house, that you assemble yourself on site.
I love that. So tell me about an example or two that you're most proud of or that really stand out to you.
Well, that's difficult. I think one of the largest projects we have had was a few years back. I think in Northwest Syria, where we had been working for years, trying to get our shelters in to this region in Syria, where you have again millions of people displaced that have been scattered. That have been fled to one small space where they're living together. And there's not, they're against the regime in Syria, but otherwise that there are many different communities, different like beliefs, and it's not a homogenic group. And what the aid community had been able to provide for years had been tents, and they had been replaced with tents. There had been hundreds and thousands of tents that had been sent, and then replaced by new tents, as they were worn out. Because again, you were not allowed to be anything durable because these people were not really allowed to be here, in this region. Here we worked a lot with the local NGO communities and the UN organizations to see can we do something together, and that resulted in a project where and now we have had more than 10,000 shelters in this region that have been durable and now standing for years. And not only that, the shelters provide the safety and dignity themselves, I think we also then managed together with the humanitarian organizations, that were present here to open up the eyes and to enable more durable and more like less temporary shelter solutions for people who are living in this region. I think, and this is, I think it's remarkable because it's actually, 10,000 shelters is 10,000 families, that we can provide some safety and dignity. So that's one thing I would say is of many projects that I'm very, very proud of, because it was something we were working on for such a long time in close partnership with humanitarian organizations. But I think secondly also is that something very, very different, I would say, is that our shelters are, remember what we learned from our first user research with that, the tent that was designed for 5 people, and not every family globally is made of 5 people, or it rarely exists. It's very different in different cultures. We designed a shelter to be modular, so you can adapt. You can make it larger, you can make it smaller, etc. And when we had the pandemic really hitting Central America, then as in many places, there was an acute lack of places for triaging units, for information units, for treatment houses. The primary healthcare system were under a lot of pressure, and new facilities was required. And here, our partners, in this case, it was the UN Refugee Agency. They used our shelters and put many of them together and created large superstructures that could, house hundreds of patients, for COVID treatment. So that was like really, taking something that we had developed for family shelters, etc., into healthcare and also making it effectively. And today, I would think that around 20% of the projects we are doing are healthcare related. And I think that is also interesting to see how something not intended use, in an emergency where you have to do innovation, can come up as, really a challenge and obstacle can prove to be, can give birth to new solutions and new ways of working. So I would say that would also be something I would be very, very proud of.
Absolutely. Two amazing examples. There's a couple words you've used over and over again. One of them is durable, which makes complete sense in your space. The other one you've mentioned a couple of times is dignity. And I'm curious as to how that comes into play, because especially in an emergency situation, whether it's a man-made disaster, a natural disaster, durable, yes, certainly, but you're trying to meet a need that is urgent and quick. And so where does dignity come into play? Where did you see dignity lacking?
That's it's a fuzzy concept, and it's very interesting to explore, I think, as a designer, what is dignity. So what we meant for in the beginning with dignity, and I think a few things that hold through across like different cultures for us, it has been, of course, the sense of that your walls, etc., are strong enough to keep the world outside. And that's not only the elements of the weather and hard rain, it's also about sound, not having conversation indoors, that when you're camping in the tents and all your friends outside can hear what you're saying, but actually having some insulation, some privacy here, having a place where you can stand upright and you don't need to bend down all the time, but also really having a place that you can shape of your own, that you can build, extend, repair, maintain over time. I mean, there are very few of us here who would buy an apartment and keep it just the way it is, because we have different needs. So we're doing these sort of modifications or hacks or renovations all the time. I think it's the very, very same when you're displaced, in particular then, because what you're having is so scarce. So having, I think, with dignity really comes the sense of taking something into ownership, and that is actually being able to repair and maintain it as you live there, to shape it according to your needs. It's very, very difficult to shape a tent. I mean, it is what it is. You cannot extend it. But if you're having a shelter with a sturdy frame and where you can put on, local materials, etc., you can build it. You can add on to it. You can adapt it for different environments. So I think a lot of it comes into that, also making it something that's very available for people to maintain and to make their own.
I love that. I had not considered that
And
before, so thank you for sharing.
no, but I think just one anecdote I think which is very interesting. We're doing a project right now which we will exhibit in September. So I think this is a good where we are having a photographer traveling around to we have, as we said, we have provided our shelters to more than 80 countries, and we're more than 90,000 shelters, very different cultures, very different communities, but the shelter has been sort of the same. The starting kit has been the same. Now we are documenting how do the shelters look like after a few years when they've been in these very different cultures. So we have a photographer who's actually very talented interior design photographer. So it's not like a war correspondent or a humanitarian photographer, but someone who comes from interior background. And he has been traveling a lot and meeting these families and documented their lives. And I think this exhibition will go live. We will have it in New York in the end of September. So that's will be the first. We will happy to share more information as we have the venue and all of that set. But I think one we're looking at these images already now is that you can see like the adaptations people make, of course, of function. You make room dividers, you put shelves, you have storage. We have all the same practical requirements. You need a sink, you need there are a few things that we need. They're very, very similar. So I would say you see the similarity, even though cultures are very, very different. There's a lot of similar needs and expressions. But then, of course, it's very interesting to see what I'm very interested in as well is the decoration part, how people actually decorate their houses and how they decorate the shelters. Even now, I mean, our shelters are super, I would like to the audience who haven't seen them, it's like it's a it's really on the temporary side of a building. You know, the walls are like 6 millimeters thick. You know, it's not a permanent, but people are decorating them. We do see a lot of paintings inside directly on the wall, like almost like mural paintings or fabrics, etc. So I think this is very interesting to see and to document, and something that we will show now in starting in September, like our documentation that we have done from these different cultures. So I think this is interesting to see how people change the shelters over time and make them respond to their needs, and both cultural and practical needs.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, that's fascinating that you have, and it also makes sense with your background to have the interior design perspective coming into play instead of just like a war correspondent or something. So I'm excited to hear more about that and get that out to the world as well. We also have a TED Talk, Innovation Design, A Winding Path. As we talked about, you've worked with a lot of with the UN, other NGOs, both local, international, everybody doing it with limited resources, right? So Better Shelter, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, so the UNHCR, the IKEA Foundation. How do you work together when you're talking, especially governmental, international, as you talked about, even just your learnings early on with shipping, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of different countries come into play, a lot of minds probably coming to play as well. So how do you integrate what happens with practicality, affordability? What do those partnerships look like?
That's a very good question. I think that running these partnerships, I think that is the art of the game, and you know, it's have to address them in the right way. I think that's where the challenge is. I usually work at when I give presentations in architecture design schools. I was like the product design was probably 20% of the shelter's success. I think 80% was that we managed to work in and grow these partnerships, and that is a challenge, but I think it's a must. And I think that's, as a designer, it's very easy that we doing a bit like what I did myself, with Johan Karlsson. We try to do everything on our own because we know how to design, we know how to produce, we can make like the website, we think we know, we know it all. At least that was for me as a designer. I think having to have abandoned that attitude with learning from Johan Karlsson, and then seeing, okay, but we need to work together. And then who are the key stakeholders that can help us to succeed with our mission? And in this world, we learn, there was no one who can mobilize aid and help so many people so quickly like the UN Refugee Agency. I mean, they are incredible in what they're doing and how when they respond. Having said that, of course, that is when things are moving to, in their in their operating model. It's when they're doing innovation is a very, very different thing. That was very tricky for us in the UN to find a way, how can we innovate together? That took a lot of hard work. And I think the help we really got here was with IKEA, which really has an organization that comes, they are really encouraging innovation. They encourage risk taking. They don't encourage failures, but they say we should celebrate failures because we learn from it. So that mindset, working together, and then we were a very small and nimble team that could do a lot of the running and the legwork in the design. That was Force Partnership that made it happen. We couldn't have made it, without any of these three components. So I think that working in partnership but it is complicated, as you say, because there's so many aspects of this, and it was so little that we knew in the beginning. And it was like in any project, there's been so many learnings along the way for us. And when having these learnings and discoveries of what to know, what doesn't work, then really it's about the relationships in the end that we have built with these organizations, to have strong relationships where you can dare to be very open and share what is working and what is not, with knowing that you are not being punished for it, as long as it's more important to be transparent and accurate. So I think that the partnership is partnership, honesty, and trust. These things that we heard a lot, but buzzwords, but it's really true. That is, I think, the components to build something at the scale that we have been able to do it.
Yeah. as you said, partnerships are key. Partnerships are how things get done, especially with small teams, limited resources. So what are, I guess on one side, give me a challenge, lesson learned type thing. And then one side, give me something that just surprised you and just was so exciting and really allowed the work to get done in some special way that you hadn't imagined.
Yeah, I think that one thing that to pick on the first question, what really like to get the work done, I think that was the capacity the capacity of our private sector partners, both in manufacturing and logistics. None of them are humanitarian organizations per se, and they are, they're running their businesses as business for for profit purposes ultimately. They all showed a very high interest in contributing to our project. A lot of these organizations, they worked in developments that are pro bono for us, in making things happen, but they also have helped us both to preempt a lot of like mistakes that could have happened, and then also to set up a sustainable manufacturing that could work without us. We had never done it before. I mean, I think that was the right decision. We said we should not try to recreate something ourselves that the industry sort of already taken care of. And when we started the business in the first year, we went from, this was in 2015 when we started manufacturing, we went from 0 deliveries in Q1, and then in Q2 to Q4 we had delivered 10,000 shelters. It was like an insane start, but that was really for all our suppliers working together, and we had very expert companies doing their function. That was so useful. So I think that was so interesting to see, like that well-oiled machinery as it happened. I think that was absolutely like a great learning, and the mentality to, when we discovered problem, which we did, it was about finding a way to resolve them. And I think this was really, people, I think they really walked the extra mile, knowing the cause, I think, of what we were doing. But it was, very rewarding to see. And, it's so we did learn absolutely a lot there. And then was the other thing you said, like challenges that turns out we have absolutely had so many challenges. So I just have to see where to start. No, but I think that, yeah, we had from our early I think one major challenge that we did have was more of to, I would say, well, so I'm sorry, I'm thinking here, but probably one of the largest challenges that we have had has been to, and it sounds very boring, but it is about to finance what we are doing, like the shelters, because our partners, and they really have walked all the extra miles. The UNHCR, I mean, they have purchased from us, I should probably know this, but I think it's around 60 to 70,000 shelters themselves. Their funding, has really decreased in relationship how many people they're wanting to help. So they've been buying less and less and less, from us every year, even though the needs are there. And I talked to them on the phone today with the recent floods, in Brazil, and the needs are there. So that has been a very sad development that we have seen. We can read about it in the news every day. We are so overwhelmed with emergencies. I think on the good end here is that we have been approached by organizations and companies that want to be part of the solutions and that want to chip in and help, both financially and also practically, like taking care of, helping us with logistics, etc. And that has actually helped us. I think as of last year, the 80% of the shelters we provided last year, they were actually financed by not humanitarian funding, but by private funding, by people who in philanthropic institutions who really wanted to help. A huge change in our business model and how we operate, because we never had marketed, we at that time we didn't even have a donate button on our website, because we've only been working with, selling the shelters, and to organizations. That did turn around quickly. Now we're trying to, okay, how can we institutionalize this? How can we make it like replicable and grow it over time? But I think that is, again, one thing we get really help, and support from the private sector and without really, I would say, advertising for it. So I think there's a lot of benefit in these partnerships. And then also, okay, sorry, one more, if I may. I think there was, like last year's earthquake in Turkey again. We had more than 5,000 shelters to go to Turkey. We talked to our logistics partners to deliver them to Turkey for installation, to move 5,000 shelters. That was around 3 months of shipments for them, because when an emergency like this truck, there's a surge on the market, and all the truck and drivers are busy. So it was super tough. We did call IKEA and ask them, can you help us, because you do move quite some stuff around? And they were like, yes, when can we start? And then the Monday after, they started moving it, and in 2 weeks we had moved the entire 3,000 shelters. So again, that was like really having the capacity of, in this case, it was IKEA that was the partner to help us. They helped us achieve something we could never have done alone or with the other partners we had at the time. So again, it's working in partnership can really open up unexpected doors.
Absolutely. Well, and as we've discussed, you have a global presence. The need certainly outweighs what any one organization can provide. War, conflict, natural disasters. You've come up with an amazing solution, but as you just talked about, it's also not a matter of having a solution, it's getting the solution to the people who need it. So let's talk a little bit about that logistics process. How ordinarily, you're talking floodings, earthquakes, wars, people on the move constantly, trying to find somewhere safe. So what does that look like? How do you deploy? How does that process look like from either you see something on the news or you get a call till it gets to where it needs to go? What is that process? Explain that for us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we are partnering. We are not an operational, NGO, meaning that we do not build the shelters on the ground ourselves. So we have a network of very professional humanitarian partners who they know the products we're having. They know in what kind of context they fit well, where they do good, and they also know where not to use them, because it's not the one size fits all type of solution we're having. It makes very much sense in certain places, and then it may not make sense in others. So they typically help us. So when something big happens, we typically reach out to our partners, so they reach out to us, and we say, okay, what are the needs on the ground, and are we a viable solution? And there's a needs assessment that we make together, and then we can typically get, there's a need of whatever 50,000 shelters. Usually the needs can be unfortunately very great, and then we say, okay, what is feasible for us to do together? Maybe we can find, we can do 3,000 because we don't have more space or there's not more funding. So then we work together to find, the resources that are taken, and also they are doing, our entire part is doing all they want. They have to work with all the local organizations and the local majors, etc. See where can we build them, where can we put up these shelters, because that's a huge complex issue in itself. But all of these, like the camp planning, the coordination with local authorities, that is done by our partners who are expert in this. They know this very, very well. Then we come in when they say, okay, now we need these shelters, so we need them to be shipped and installed. That's where we can help them, because then we have them typically on an emergency stockpile. Then we can, then we ship them. It's typically by road and sea, but sometimes it's by air in urgent deliveries. And then we do train our partners to set up the shelters, and then we do the projects together. So that's typically how it works. But we do work from an emergency stockpile that's required for us, because emergencies don't come planned. That's it's the name of the game. So we need to have some contingency with our stockpiles. We have one big stockpile in Poland. That's our global stockpile, close to our manufacturing. But then we're also having emergency stocks in Turkey and in Panama, so we can ship, locally when something happens. So I think that's typically how it works. Then the shelters are built, and then of course, as they are built, we typically try to do, when we can, visits, just to inspect that everything is fine, after deployment, and then when possible after half a year or a year afterwards. So we can follow up and learn. But that's typically how a project is run.
Fantastic. Well, we talked about a couple of natural disasters. Let's talk about a man-made. Like you, we were deeply affected and devastated by the war in Ukraine, which is, of course, still ongoing. You've been very active in helping there. What has your team learned from that situation? What has either directly from the people using it, the shelter, or from just the process of getting there, or lessons learned in deployment? What have you guys seen and learned through assisting with that?
Yeah. The greatest challenge that we have had in Ukraine, and there have been many, we have done a bit more than 4,000 shelters for Ukraine response. So we have some learnings. One of the main challenges there is the winter. Our shelters are typically used in hot and whatever, so in hot climates. We have had them in Syria before when there's snow, but it's it's just below freezing point, not cooler than that. Here the temperatures are way below freezing points, and our shelters, they're not really designed for that. So we had to find a way to insulate the shelters, which was very complicated, because not only that we had to ship our shelters, because that we knew how to do, and we had good, we could ship by train to Ukraine. So I think the logistics works better than we would have expected, I think, given it's a country at war, so that was the challenge. But finding insulation material to work, and that could be sourced, quickly, because we didn't have any stockpile of that, and then installed, that was, it was a nightmare. It was really, really tough, because we were not prepared. We didn't see this coming. We had not operated in this context before. I think that was the main challenge that we had. And I think for Ukraine, what we have seen has been working afterwards is really, given the climate, is not like putting up temporary shelters, but rather trying to repair what you have. Of course, that often is at a greater cost, but it's what's required to help and to build more community centers, and to build shelters in subway stations, etc. But I think that the weather there was really a challenge. Then the training, etc., I think that worked quite well. Logistics worked quite well. We had to translate all our training materials, to Ukrainian, but that worked quite well. We had some collaborations with local municipalities, etc., providing trainings, etc. I think that worked, but what's really a challenge here was to really equip the shelters for these temperatures. And that was not only us. I think that was like the shelter community at large were really at, we had not been exposed to this before at this magnitude.
So what was your solution?
Now here we insulated them with the same standard building materials that we are using in large part of Scandinavia, which is like a mineral wool that you add onto the shelter, and then you have to seal it off with a plastic sheeting. So it was a very rudimentary solution, but it's something that we could come up with in the emergency and respond quickly with. And I think it worked quite well once it was installed, but the installation was, to be honest, very cumbersome and time consuming. And I think this is definitely where we have rooms for improvement going forward, finding better way on how we quicker can insulate our shelters, and also where we can find to have this one prefabricated, or preferably, I would say, if we could find something that's available in the supply chain today, so we wouldn't have to have everything in our warehouse to keep it, in our books, but we could purchase it so it's scalable in an emergency. But I think that's what we have learned, like this adaptation to really cold climates. And unfortunately, I mean, the war has continued, and we are also doing responses today. We don't talk as much about, Afghanistan, for example, today, or Syria, but they are ongoing. The climates there are very harsh as well. So similar challenges we are seeing, where we have a lot to do ahead.
Yeah. Well, innovation is certainly something that is core to who you are, what you do at Better Shelter, and has even been recognized by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which must have been a thrill for your industrial design and art-focused heart. It's even included in the museum's permanent collection, which is incredible. You've won the Beasley Designs Year of the Award. Time Magazine has listed you as one of the best inventions of the year. How has that helped? Funding is, of course, always an issue for everybody, especially nonprofits, especially trying to solve big issues like this and get things around the world. I'm sure that recognition was lovely and wonderful and needed, but how has it translated to help your organization and your cause?
I think it really has translated over the last year, because as we have been gearing more attention to our private sector partners. We have been required to turn to them for more support, both, as we say, with financial support, but also in terms of innovation, installations, what we just talked about Ukraine. And of course, when we have been backed by this visibility, then organizations, they tend to listen, they tend to want to help us. So, and that we are having this discussion right now, and then broadcasting like our mission and what we are doing to your entire network is, of course, very, very valuable, because the challenge that we are addressing, it's nothing that we can resolve on our own. We need organizations and people who join in with us, supporting this cause together, and we can do it as a network. I think we can succeed. So it's incredibly important, of course, in getting the message out there and building some, empathy as well for the situation and the difficulties involved.
Yes, I completely agree. And that's, yeah, makes a great point. So continuing on innovation, what are you working on for the future? It sounds like there's always something in the works, whether it's a partnership or a new challenge with the design. What's going on? What's happening next?
I think if we start with on the partnerships, and it's about, we are trying now to work with our philanthropic partners and corporate foundations, etc., to help us to set up a fund, like a humanitarian fund, where we can actually work even more with preparedness, like emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness, and not only response. We know fairly well where floodings will happen. We are not surprised by the reasons why we had in Brazil, for example. I mean, this is predictable. Our partners know it as well. The situation today is that when an emergency occurs, then we go out and ask for funding, and when we occasionally get it, then we are in the emergency, then we usually need to fly our shelters or use more expensive solutions to ship them, and we have to do everything at stress, which drives cost. If we can work in well advance and with local stockpiles, train local partners, we can help many more people for significantly less money, and we can really shorten the response time, the time from the emergency until we respond. However, that doesn't really work with how we are funded today. We are quite emergency driven. So this is like a dialogue that we are having with our corporate partners, and I think that it's, I don't want to take out any successes in advance here, because we haven't, we just started these conversations. But I think what's very hopeful is that many corporations and companies, I think they're used to thinking a long way, and they can they can think sort of long turn on things, and they can see that, okay, the return on investment is actually better if we provide the money right now, because then we can pre-stockpile, we can help more people for less money than if we're doing the emergency themselves. So we're trying to get this together, because I think that really can enable us to work even more efficiently. But it requires new partnership, and not only to be reactive, but actually really going to be proactive. And then I think with a product, it is, of course, I said adaptability. We discussed winterization, that is, but also very hot climates. Weather is getting more and more extreme. The heat waves are increasing in India and in Americas and elsewhere. In the US too. When it gets hot, it gets even hotter. We see in Southern Europe as well. So adapting the shelter to thermal heat. And then, of course, what we call greening of operations, which is really about sustainability, reducing the footprint of our shelter response, ensuring that they can be locally, reused and recycled, in a good way, so that we don't contribute to to the environmental problems that are really driving many people, out of displacement in the first place. So I would say that really working with sustainability, greening operations, together with finding ways where we can make our shelters even more adaptable to local climates. And then on top of that, finding a way where we can finance this so we can be a bit more proactive, and in that way cut costs and help more people. I think that's sort of the top 3 on my agenda right now.
It's a big agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, well, as we wrap up, you've got such an interesting mix of the business, industrial design, engineering, and then you have the art, innovation, and then have worked in both for-profit and nonprofit. So let me ask each side of your brain a question. Let's start with the business, industrial design standpoint, engineering. How would you like to see that space innovate to be able to meet humanitarian needs?
I would encourage the space to dare to come more to the humanitarian world and to the humanitarian organizations and to team up. And not because a lot of designers are doing their own solutions at their desktops, but they're rarely typically meeting the needs on the ground, because just like I in the beginning didn't know why the system is operating the way it is, they will likely not have this knowledge as well. And the only way we can get this knowledge is together with humanitarian organizations. It takes a lot of more work to work together, in the term, I think, from a design point of mind, because it's like just quick if I do the design myself. But you need the extended family, in order to really make an impact here to help. So need it. So I would encourage them to seek, engagement opportunities with humanitarian organizations, whether they are international or local, so that to innovate together, rather than thinking that me as a designer, I know what's needed and I complete the solutions on my desktop and then I send it in, because that will likely not work. I tried that, when I did my first design, I send them to the UNHCR, and I remember my first meeting with them, and they were explaining for me for an hour why nothing of this would work. So we had to start from scratch again. But then in partnership, we could make it work. So I think that's really is teaming up in partnership and paying the extra toll that it takes, to build a partnership, and having a patience with that. It's all worth it, because we cannot, and not any one discipline can, find any solution to this on their own. We need to work together.
Absolutely. And for the nonprofit sector, innovation, art, creativity, how would you like to see that sector use more of those, flex those muscles?
I think it's about some guts, actually, to work with innovation, to accept that some things fail at times, and we probably should work for that, to learn from failure. It doesn't mean that we need to expose the affected communities at risk. That's what I hear about. We are working with refugees. Are you suggesting that we, should keep them sort of, as the test dummies for the solutions? That's not all what I'm saying. It's not the way when we're developing trucks or cars or furniture, like Kevin, I said, very established way where you can develop new solutions without putting people at risk. But it's about having an appetite for projects that can improve a situation, whether it's a process you're innovating or it's a product, but you must accept that it probably will fail quite often. And typically a success to me is like, it's a series of overcome failures. That's how you get there. So the failure is not really an end in itself, but it's like, okay, we have to try another thing. I do. So I think there's some guts to drive that. And then I also hear about, but our donors, they want us to succeed. Our donors are like pushing us. We cannot go and tell them, you invest this much money in a project that failed. I don't think that is necessarily true all the time. I think that in open conversations with donors, and maybe I'm spoiled because I've worked with IKEA Foundation, and they have really been, like encourage us to explore and to try new things, and they pushed us in that way. I think that a lot of donors, particularly corporate donors, they understand this. There wouldn't be any business around today if they wouldn't have done systematic innovation. And I know many of the big corporations, they have, as we should put in whatever 2% of our resources into R&D, or they have they have some targets how to set this up, because they understand that this is a way to us make it more effective. But you have to have a bit of a long-term thing, and I think that's difficult for humanitarian organizations who are really about working day and night just to help as many people as possible. And even when they do so, they can only help a fraction of the people in need. in that situation to think about innovation, then you need to have some guts and some perspective, to find a safe place where you can work with innovation over time. And I know a lot of organizations are doing that. I think that a lot of humanitarian organizations are addressing this, but I think there's a lot that can be done. And I think also I think encouragement will go to the humanitarian partners. Don't try to resolve everything on your own. Don't try to work. There are so many people who are experts in different fields. So team out and do work together with the private sector. I would say there's this it's very difficult, I would say, for many NGOs to work with private sector entities if they are not non-profits. It's much easier if you are a non-profit to work with them. And I can understand that this is challenging, but that's not reason enough, from competition point of view, etc. You have to have, open bidding and all of that. I think it can be done. It's not an excuse because it's so expensive if we should try to resolve all our challenges ourselves. So again, it's a kick for partnership in that direction as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Thank you so much. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've certainly learned a lot about you, about the organization, and just about refugees in general, which for so many people listening will only be a story they hear on the news. And so I thank you for shedding light on that perspective and their needs. So how can our listeners connect with you and, of course, learn about Better Shelter?
Of course, I think the best way is to follow us on our social media. That's where we update both. I think if it's professional updates, etc., and these type of partnership opportunities, it would be over LinkedIn. For more to see what we're doing, with our partners in the field, it would be, typically on Instagram or Facebook where you find that information. Our website has a big library of the projects we have had in different regions and locations. We also do publish stuff that we have, like lessons learned, etc., on the website. So I would encourage you to check that out. And then, of course, I think that if there is an idea for collaboration in any way, to contact us, let us know. We are eager to explore new partnerships and new ways of working. So we're very happy to hear from you guys. And we have all the contacts available at our website, including my direct contact. So it's yeah, I think it's I would encourage everyone to take the step and join the effort.
Absolutely, and that is bettershelter.org. Thank you so much for joining us. This was worth the wait. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've been waiting for a while to get you on. We finally got you scheduled. And I loved this conversation. So thank you for being here. Thank you for talking about what you do. And more importantly, thank you for the work you do each and every day. It's been a pleasure.